We're lucky to have with us today Tunku Varadarajan. He is the editor of Newsweek International, based in New York. He's visiting here and has written extensively about everything, including India, including Indian journalism, many years ago. But let's start with Newsweek and the Daily Beast. Do you think that that merger was a good business decision, and where do you see it going in this space, in the digital space and in the print space?
Well, it was a good decision in that it effectively saved Newsweek. Newsweek was a stagnating, a great American brand, a great international brand, but it had been stagnating for a number of years, and its circulation was down, its readership was down, its readability was down, and in merging with the Daily Beast, it got a major blood transfusion, money, new life, new energy. So I think it was a great thing that they merged.
But last year there was a loss of $30 million.
Oh, that money is being lost, but I think we need to give it time. The merger happened barely a year and a half ago, so
4 years.
I think give it 3 or 4 years, and we'll see where we are. And if it is still losing $30 million, then we'll regard ourselves as being in trouble. But I'm optimistic.
Is there a place for a print magazine today?
Well, it depends on there will always be a place for a good print magazine. There will be no place for a dud. Newsweek is a good print magazine, at least we like to think so. There are places where we can improve. But yeah, I think for as long as we offer for as long as we're adding to the reader's value in some way, there will be room for the magazine. That's not to say that it's easy to put out a news weekly. It's one of the hardest things to do in journalism.
In today's time, when television is beating you, the digital media is ahead of you faster.
Everyone is ahead of us.
Yeah, so how do you make a print magazine that's going to come out a week later and still be relevant? It's a challenge.
Yeah, that's what taxes us every week. That's really what gives us sleepless nights. We've got to compete with not as many daily newspapers as exist in India, but the Times, the Wall Street Journal, the FT, and various other tabloids. And as you say, there's television, and let's not forget that there's a plethora of bloggers who race out of the starting blocks the moment something happens and wallpaper the place with their opinions. And so we do have a more uphill task as a magazine than weekly news magazines have ever had before. So yeah, it's a challenge, but it's one that we relish rising to.
Yeah, a lot of magazines are changing their format, such as the Sunday Times magazine in New York. New York Times Sunday. It's completely changed.
It's unrecognizable.
It looks more digital in the way it's giving information. But I think the most famous one that I recall, where the digital media took a jump up from Newsweek, in fact, was the Bill Clinton story with Monica Lewinsky, when Matt Drudge broke the story on the Drudge report, whereas the Newsweek reporter had the first story and
sat on it
because they were saying that we want to get confirmation from the White House. How do you get confirmation from the White House? They were trying to authenticate Monica Lewinsky's voice. How do you do that? And while taking time to go through the diligence that one normally does in a print story, Matt Drudge jumped Newsweek and published it.
Well, that's another pressure that old school magazines or magazines with, shall we say, more conventional ethics will continue to face. Drudge doesn't have the sorts of ethical pressures that a magazine like Newsweek, he doesn't have to fact check himself. He doesn't have to answer to anyone but
he boasted about that when he was honored at the Washington Press Association, and he was introduced, the man who introduced him, I recall vaguely that he said something that I don't agree with what he does, I don't agree with his methods, but this is where it's at today.
Well, for people like Drudge, there's only one prize that they seek, which is to be first. If you're not first, you're a loser. Newsweek isn't in the business necessarily of being first.
It's worse to be wrong.
It's worse to be wrong than to be second. Or there's no point in being first if you can't be sure that you're right. So there will always be that disadvantage. Papers like the Times probably have sat on stories that they've been scooped by others on, but because they haven't been by the Times, I mean the New York Times, not the Times of India, which I suspect will be faster out of the blocks. I suspect
Times of India?
The Times of India, I suspect.
No way. Indian prisoner in a Pakistani jail. There was a confusion with the name, and we thought that Sarabjit was being released, and the paper Times of India went to bed saying Sarabjit, and the next morning it appears as Sarabjit when large part of the other papers had already changed it to Surjit.
Well, I think that whole episode was cast the Indian media in very sorry light.
In what way?
In the sense that it was clear, you know, my understanding of the situation is that the Pakistani official said Surjit initially. You know, I've been listening to things on YouTube, and he said Surjit clearly, and somehow
one person misreported it.
Yeah.
I think it was headlines today.
It's just the way everything snowballs. People don't fact check. There's a bandwagon effect. People Google things, and if they find Sarabjit, they don't bother to do their own homework anymore. And so,
for example, Abu Jindal was being written as Abu Jindal,
right,
for the longest time.
Punjabi.
Yeah.
Right.
Until somebody corrected it, and then it started being corrected again.
Yeah.
But he was Abu Jindal for a long time.
Well, there's a lot of
Marwari, not Punjabi.
There's a lot of sloppiness in Indian journalism. That's not to say that there isn't sloppiness in the United States or elsewhere. The British press is notoriously sloppy and trigger happy and you know, sensationalist. The tabloid sections anyway. But yeah, I think the Indian press seems to make an awful lot of mistakes an awful lot of times, in my humble opinion. I don't wish to kind of blacken the name of the Indian press altogether. Just the other day I was
We don't need your help.
No.
It's happening.
I mean,
I
was at an editorial meeting at Outlook magazine, thanks to Krishna Prasad, who's somebody I've known for many years, and he was kind enough to invite me into an editorial meeting, and I was very impressed with the thorough professionalism of the exercise and the care.
They were just putting on a show for you.
Get
real.
Perhaps,
where are you, Tunku? We know how to put on a show. We're great liars. What are you doing? You're believing everything. You've become American.
But
don't be so gullible.
I don't know. Maybe if it was a show, then it was a pretty good show.
Well, I'm sure Outlook. I'm just kidding. But now that we're on the subject of the Indian press, when the Radia tapes came out, you did write a piece on Barkha.
Yeah.
And in one way, you explained the story by, since you were writing more for the Western press, you did explain it by putting Katie Couric in its place and other names, Ken Oleta and all that, and tried to put a reference point on what happened.
Right.
And you were pretty rough on Barkha.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so. Because she came out as being corroborating with Neera Radia. You also criticized her, the program she did in which she invited people to interrogate her, which I agree with you, it was a disaster. It was hysterical and nothing was solved by that, made it worse. But you know, I am working on this story, and one of the things that I have come across is that, yes, the way Barkha sounds on the tapes that we hear sounds that she's really part of the system of lobbying and playing the game. But I was told by someone who heard a large part of the tapes that were not published that there were a lot of tapes in which Barkha was doing nothing but asking for interviews with Kanimori and Raja, and that's all she was doing.
And you believe this person?
No, I just heard the tapes.
Sorry, you heard the tapes. Okay,
yeah.
Good. Well, in my defense, I will say that I went on the information that was available. I didn't have the fullest context. I was going on the information that was available to everyone at the time, including the transcripts that were published in the Hindu and in Outlook and various other places. So yeah, based on the information that was available to me, she didn't look terribly good.
No.
And I think you would agree that,
yeah,
absent the broader context which you referred to.
No, but sorry to interrupt you. Also, you mentioned that an Indian journalist once berated me for all this American disclosure crap. Now, our ethics, Indian journalists, have really gone to the bottom. There's no question about that. Ethics is like, should we stop at a red light or not? No, we don't. It's an individual decision. There are no real ethical strong guidelines put into place. If they are, they're very easy to circumvent. You know the history of many papers who have institutionalized taking paid news. Mm-hmm. It really couldn't be worse. And to me, that is the biggest. We've ruined our own USP. If you don't trust us, if you don't believe, there's no point for journalism's existence. Mm-hmm. Because the very reason for us is this, that you can read us or view us and suspend disbelief. We've reached the stage where you read a newspaper or watch television and watch for the plants. That so-and-so's planted this story. You look at everything to see what the real story is behind this story, because who could have planted it against this person? Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any solution to this? Have we reached a stage? I mean, you've had a long experience of journalism in various fields.
Right.
What do you think is the solution for this?
Well, I'm not sure I have a solution. I think this is clearly...
Is there a way out?
Well, I think this...
And there's good journalism being done.
No, let me make it clear that there is a lot of good journalism happening in India, and there are newspapers that do not indulge in paid news. You know, there are some fine newspapers. The Hindu is one, and again, full disclosure, it's edited by somebody...
Disclose it right away.
The Hindu is edited by my younger brother. Yeah. And so, you know, I would be willing to bet...
But his politics and his views, his perspectives, little different from yours. He's more left-leaning, and you're more right-leaning. Am I right?
That's one way of putting it. Yeah, we're radically different in our politics. We have an agreement at home never to discuss politics at the dining table when the two of us are at the table.
But you can discuss them in the car or or while traveling or in the garden.
No, we have
in the living room.
We're very gentlemanly about this. We chuckle at each other's foibles and excesses, and I think, you know, he's a gentleman communist and I'm a gentleman fascist, and we kind of okay. we get along that way. Yeah.
A long time ago, but it's an interesting thing that happened, that you tweeted about Bob Herbert, and our viewers generally don't know who he is, but he was a columnist at the New York Times.
Correct.
You tweeted that Bob Herbert resigns as New York Times columnist. Hallelujah. Arguably the most unreadable columnist in Christendom.
Right.
Now, the kind of response that you got on that really made me look at this piece, this article, and the way you were described as this thing called Tunku Varadarajan, and comes to the USA to voice his dislike of good people like Frank Rich and Bob Herbert, and then fellow Brit Tina Brown anoints him to be editor of Newsweek. WTF. Sad day for America when these things go unreported.
This is a blogger.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he says, what arrogance from an Indian-born British national. Wake up, America. Smacks of racism. Want to talk to you about that.
What the blogger's piece smacks of racism?
He smacks of racism.
Right.
Want to talk to you about that.
Right.
Have you faced racism while working in America?
Not at all. No, I mean, you know, you know, I edit Newsweek International. There are a few jobs that are better than that, more fun than that. It's a job that many people would, I'd like to think, covet. I have it. I'm an Indian. I'm a British citizen, but I'm an Indian. To most people, I'm an Indian. I was also, by the way, accused of racism in that tweet because Bob Herbert happens to be black, and I was also accused of being Christianist by using the word Christendom.
So you did something right.
So you
offended everybody.
Just people take offense at the drop of a hat in the United States, just as I suspect they do here too. But you know, the United States, there is a kind of very thin-skinned political correctness in the United States. It's particularly on the blogosphere. In
your article, Going Muslim, about Major Hassan, where he gunned down his own people from the army, you wrote about this going postal, going Muslim, a very difficult concept to understand, where, if I understood correctly, you suggested that Americans notice signs of somebody who's dropping the camouflage, and we react to those hints rather than waiting for him to go completely crazy.
Not quite. I think the way I framed this piece was I played off the phrase "going postal," which is which describes somebody who is a kind of it occurred there was a rash of shootings by postmen who clocked in and day out, did their tedious job, and one day just snapped and shot their co-workers to death. And it's referred to in cultural parlance as going postal. So I played off that, and I coined the phrase going Muslim, for which I took a lot of flack, to describe this man, Major Nidal Hassan, clearly, apparently completely assimilated, wearing the uniform of the United States, going to McDonald's and strip clubs and whatever it is that Americans do. And then one fine day, and quietly, in the back of his mind is accumulating a sense of Muslim Islamist grievance based on events in Iraq and what have you. And one fine day, he kind of snaps and does the Islamist equivalent of going postal, as happened in this particular case. And so my point was that Americans have to just come to terms with the fact that there is in their midst a community where which is susceptible to this sort of potential going haywire. And that I'm not suggesting that every Muslim in the United States is a potential murderer, far from it, and I wouldn't dream of saying that, and that would be irrational and insane to say so. But as part of being vigilant, one has to, as part of your self-protective vigilance, you have to allow for the fact that there is this potential danger and account for it and prepare for it.
But there have been cases where people have overreacted, say on a flight, and Arabs have been talking to each other in their own language, taking pictures. In fact, a Sikh family was taking pictures and got into trouble for that. Doesn't that sort of increase the paranoia?
No, of course, and there is. But I mean, let's be clear though that what happened in the United States on 9/11, when was it 3,500 people died in a matter of hours. In terms of the backlash to that, if my facts are not wrong, there were 4 people killed across the United States in the rest of that year that are directly in some way linked to a sense of anger on the part of the native population.
And one of them was a Sikh.
One of them was a Sikh, one was a Bangladeshi, 2 were Arabs. So we're talking about 4 people. Now, if 9/11 had happened in any other country, if 9/11 had happened in India, can you imagine what the backlash would have been against the population that is perceived, the community that is perceived to have caused this mayhem? I mean, there would have been massacre after massacre across the country. So, but my point is that the Americans showed admirable restraint. There were 4 deaths, each one to be deeply regretted. But can you imagine the restraint and the calm and the poise of a country that manages to maintain self-control and whose politicians go out of their way to say Muslims are citizens, people with turbans are not terrorists? There's that civic sense, that civic cohesion, that equipoise.
Yeah, but wasn't 9/11 used by Bush to start a war?
Well, there were forensic arguments, and yes, I think, but still, it was not. It was it had to be voted on by Congress. It wasn't a knee-jerk, lawless kind of sense of civic breakdown. It was. You may disagree with the motives, you may disagree with the arguments, but it was, the permission of the legislative body was sought for the waging of war. It was given by people who subsequently claimed to be critics of the war, but they gave it nonetheless. People like John Kerry, Hillary Clinton. So there was that procedure that was followed. It was not a kind of headlong leap into war willy-nilly. It was a carefully calibrated, argued. The case was taken to the UN. The case was taken to Congress. So it was done according to the terms of the country's law.
But that's what the Indian government does when they want to go after someone. They use the instruments of democracy to set up a committee, destroy that person through the committee, through the income tax raids, through the enforcement directorate. So what you're saying is Americans did it with a veneer of following all the international laws.
It was more than a veneer.
But 9/11 was used.
9/11 was first used to take the battle to Afghanistan, to the Taliban and to Al-Qaeda,
yes,
and Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. What followed?
So there's no restraint by the American government in this.
Well, I don't think. I mean, are you suggesting that they had no right to intervene in Afghanistan and do away with Al-Qaeda? I mean, we could argue for hours about that, but I mean, I take the view.
Well, I think if it was a solution, I would definitely say they should intervene. Right. But there hasn't been any solution for years in any country they've intervened.
They were not to know that at the time, but at the time.
But they never know it in any country that they intervene, and they always leave having not accomplished their goal.
Well, that is a separate matter. I think you may have the right to intervene is quite separate from whether the intervention yields the sorts of results that one would be happy with. I think one can criticize the US for the manner in which it has conducted the campaign in Afghanistan. You can certainly criticize the US for the manner in which it intervened in Iraq. But all these things, the execution is quite separate from the justifications for intervention, is my point of view.
Let's get back to your writing. You've written about Julian Assange, and I want to read this because I want our viewers to get your style of writing. It is unlike any journalist that I have read. This is Tunku Varadarajan's description of Julian Assange. With his bloodless, sallow face, his lank hair drained of all color, his languorous, very un-Australian limbs, and his aura of blinding pallor that appears to admit no nuance, Assange looks every inch the amoral, uber-nerd villain icily detached from the real world of moral choices in which the rest of us saps live. Call him the Unaleaker, with apologies to the victims of Ted Kaczynski. And then you end the article with, our aversion to Assange and his ways, to his posturing, gaudy pseudo-insurgency, need to be expressed in ways prosecutorial. Let us instead shower him with our most basic contempt and dismiss him as the fraud that he is. WikiLeaks is a brothel of self-promotion. Assange is puffed up pimp.
Right.
That's very strong language.
Yeah, it's, I felt strongly about it.
And you wrote about the fact that many of the facts that came out put people's lives at risk.
Yeah.
He's a hero at sorts, and especially your brother's,
He's also a rapist.
Yes. Well, that is yet to be proved, because those women, complained a week after the sexual encounter. That's a separate issue. What I want to ask you is that your brother's paper, The Hindu, of which he's the editor, made an alliance with Julian Assange to print WikiLeaks. And a large part of the objections, which people have objected around the world, as you did, is that it put people at risk. Most of it, a lot of it, which is sent in cables back and forth, is gossip, and could be could not be substantiated. Many of it was much of it was factually incorrect. So, do you support The Hindu for doing that? Do you agree with them?
No, I don't. I think what The Hindu published, however, is different from what The Guardian and The Times published. They publish a lot of the stuff based on. They published a lot of the Afghan theater leaks, which were leaks that put at risk the lives of people who were working closely with the U.S., Afghan civilians who were working with the U.S., and Assange and the Times. Informers, journalists, civilians with whom the army had contact, and as a result of which reports had been filed naming names and or specific locations, or providing enough detail to give to people who were bent on revenge enough information to identify and kill the people in question. Assange and the newspapers with whom he collaborated argued that they had redacted the material sufficiently to protect as many people as they could, but it was still clear from the U.S. security establishment said that was not true, that there was still enough information out there as a result of these leaks to put people at risk. So that's one aspect of my objection to it. The other aspect is some people might regard it as being a bit staid, but I think it's been very destructive of the practice of diplomacy. Diplomats need the freedom. They need to be able to speak with candor to each other, to their host governments. They need to speak with candor to their ministries of foreign affairs back home, and if they're and the candor arises because they're guaranteed confidentiality. They know their cables will never see light of day. They know that the India-Pakistan discussions between the ministers are informal, back channel, whatever. You need to have that cloak of confidentiality in order for matters to be thrashed out in a frank and candorous, if that's a word, way. Candid. What has happened now is that diplomats have basically zipped. They've gummed their lips. They've sealed themselves. And how can anyone now be confident that a cable he files or a conversation she has will not somehow be leaked someday? And what would the consequences of that be? And I think basically the practice of diplomacy has taken a major hit as a result of Assange, and I think the world can only be the poorer for it. I don't think we can poo-poo diplomacy that easily. We either have it or we don't. And diplomacy is clearly a better. Diplomatic relations are much better than undiplomatic relations. My other objection to Assange is really what I was homing in on in this piece, which is what does he want? What is he trying to achieve here? He wants to. He's anti-war. He's anti-violence. He's anti-capitalism. He's anti-government. What is he in favor of? When he undoes all these threads that basically bind society together, that bind countries together, basically that lead to the existence of civilization, what will be left except a lot of undone thread, a lot of chaos, a lot of nothing, a lot of nihilism. And what will take the place of the stuff that he has undone? He hasn't told us what it is, other than a kind of self-aggrandized hero figure to the nihilistic left and the Hindu.
And the Hindu. That's a good ending. You wrote a while ago in 1999 about the Hindu Taliban movement.
Right.
Now, a lot has changed since 1999.
Correct.
The Godhra riots took place. What is your view today? What is your feel? You must be reading about what Narendra Modi and his followers are really, I think, really avid tweeters. Mm-hmm. He has a huge support. Where do you see that area going?
Well, I use the phrase Hindu Taliban as a provocation because, you know, clearly it was my way of getting people to focus attention on the problem of Hindu fundamentalism.
That's a big difference between you and your brother.
The provocation?
Yeah. You're not afraid to be provocative and be controversial.
That's because I'm not editing a newspaper. I can be a loose cannon. He needs to be more responsible than me. Anyway, I think it's very, you know, one of the things I always insist on doing is to describe myself as a Hindu, because I feel that sane, civilized Hindus do themselves and society and secularism a disservice by shrinking from the term. You know, you see a lot of Hindus who are sort of squeamish about describing themselves as Hindus because they're afraid that they'll be associated with the bad Hindus, the Hindu Taliban. So what good Hindus, secular Hindus, Hindus who don't want to kill Muslims, need to do is to assert that they're Hindus too and say, give me my religion back. You don't speak for me. That's my religion too. And my religion doesn't allow this sort of behavior. My religion doesn't encourage carnage, doesn't encourage pogroms. My religion doesn't say that you have to go out and ethnically cleanse parts of Ahmedabad. So I think that's one thing. I think it's very important for Hindus to start, good Hindus, cultural Hindus, you know, people like you and me, to start, I'm assuming you're born into a Hindu family, need to just say, back off, it's my religion too. You don't have the take on the Hindu religion.
It's not only the religion, they've taken the color, they've taken the flower, they've taken animals,
yeah.
Which is now, if you're wearing orange, you're following a brand.
Exactly. I mean, orange doesn't become me, so I never wear it. But I think on the whole, you're right. I think we want these things back. We need to wrestle them back from the people who've appropriated them for themselves and for their political agenda. Now, as far as Modi is concerned, he has a lot of apologists, and largely based on this perception that he's working economic miracles in Gujarat, and he's turned the state into a sort of efficient South Korea-like place, you know, where investors are welcome, the investing guest is God, which may all be true. I mean, I don't have the facts at my fingertips. I don't really know whether that is in fact the case, but that's certainly the perception. No, none of which, however, washes away his sins, which I believe he hasn't been held to account for. You know, he hasn't faced any. He hasn't been held to account in a court of law for what happened on his watch, and I think that will forever be a stain not just on him, but on the Indian nation.
Well, it's been quite messy because there've been different committees and different reports all contradicting each other. One saying he's exonerated, another indicted him. So it's not. There hasn't been a clear answer to this.
No, I know. It's. Look, I'm realistic. I don't think Modi will ever be prosecuted for what happened. But you know, forget Modi. I mean, you know, even the people with the actual blood on their hands have not been prosecuted. That's to me the most heinous and appalling thing about the whole Gujarat business is that it's not just the chief minister on whose watch this happened who's been allowed to go unpunished or unchastised. It's every rung in the whole bloody process has, to my knowledge, gone scot-free. So you've had impunity, rampant impunity there. To me, what is particularly...
That's exactly what Hannah Arendt wrote about.
And it's
the
not
banality of evil, because
exactly.
There was an atmosphere where it's okay to do it.
To me, what is particularly worrying, or what will be messy beyond belief, is that if Modi comes one day to become Prime Minister of this country, it could pose serious problems for the conduct of India's international relations. And there will be countries which will not give him permission to visit.
That's happened.
Yeah, already as Chief Minister of Gujarat, which is a fairly significant position. He can't go to the United States. Indian groups are constantly inviting him to come, and he's never able to come. I read now that he's thumbed his nose at the United States and has said that he's going to look for greener pastures in China. Maybe he'll find his kindred spirits over there. I don't know.
Last question, Tunku. In your column where you wrote for 2011, the list of biggest losers, one of the awards was the How Not to Run a Country Award, which you gave to Manmohan Singh and Sonia Gandhi for converting India from an emerging power into a declining one.
No, I think we can all agree that Mr. Manmohan Singh is a terribly nice man.
That's not good enough.
But we can also agree that, like many nice men, he's paralyzed by an inability to take a decision, by an inability to crack the whip, by an inability to knock heads together. He's also, in many ways, as we all agree, under the thumb of Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, who, without whose say-so he doesn't do anything, in the sort of broader term. Some
people say that's a misconception.
I would love it to be a misconception. I crave.
Which means it's taking the blame off him and putting it on her, that she's manipulating him.
So it's very convenient for him to be able to say that. Yeah. Well, in that case, he should be man enough to throw off his shackles and, Manmohan Singh, you've got nothing to lose but your chains.
It's a big mystery. Who's pulling who? Who's taking the decisions?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not transparent.
But the bottom line is that it is leading to governmental paralysis.
Yes.
And it's not good for the country. It's not good for the economy. It's not good for the morale. It's not good for self-esteem.
In India, you don't have to worry about self-esteem.
Oh, I think India.
Everybody's like, don't you know who I am? Everybody's somebody. In America, you have these courses to build up your self-confidence and self-esteem. We need courses here to bring it down.
No, I mean the self-esteem of the ordinary citizen.
Okay.
And I think
yes, the ordinary citizen.
The ordinary citizen, I think, is in India isn't encouraged to think big. And I think one of the things that the economic reforms did was that for the first time in a millennium, ordinary Indians were able and started to see the glimmer of bigness in their own personal possibilities. And I think that was one of the greatest things that the economic reforms did.
But do you think it's because private enterprise is exactly what you say it is, where the Indian individual is able to now have a vision which is larger than before, but the government is still stuck in the old socialism with the red tape and the bureaucracy, and it hasn't moved along with what is actually happening to the citizens of India and what the citizens in business are doing on their own, despite what the government is doing?
Yeah, I think it's still a case that India flourishes and Indians flourish in spite of the government rather than because of it. And it will always be that way, because for as long as the government is as involved as it is in the lives of ordinary Indians. The government
or as long as the government is as alienated from what is happening in India.
Yeah, I think the proof that it is alienated from what is happening is that it's unable to read the public mood, which is a clamor for less government, not more.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Tunku.
Thank you.
It's really good of you to give us this time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.